This morning we are continuing in a message series about being positive, staying positive as God's people in what is often a very negative world. And a couple of weeks ago we talked about being grateful. Last Sunday we talked about being encouraging. And I had a member here at Heist Community Church send me an email this week. I just want to share it with you. She writes, I did a thing this week, today, actually. I became an anonymous encourager at work. Anonymous because I wanted to be about the encouragee and not me. There's a very sweet lady here, but she lacks confidence. She struggles sometimes in her work. She's one of those folks with whom people become easily frustrated. Some folks are rather unpleasant to her. Many make fun of her, but she consistently does what most do not. She tries to do and be better. Well, she found a card on her desk today which acknowledged how impressive it is that she wants to learn and do more in her role with the company. How she isn't afraid to ask for help, and she never should be. She knows without a doubt that someone sees her efforts, right? Got that card, and the person who wrote this says, I swear she was walking taller this afternoon. I'm looking for the next person to encourage. Now that's encouraging to me. When we take these attitudes that we talk about here on Sunday morning, and we put them to work on Monday morning. And so today we're going to continue with this series about attitudes that we can have that again make us positive Christians in a negative world. And this morning we're going to talk about enthusiasm. Just a brief reminder, because this is critical when we talk about these attitudes and think about these attitudes, whether it's being grateful, being encouraging, again this morning being enthusiastic. Attitudes are a choice, right? Attitudes are a choice. We can choose to be grateful or not. We can choose to be an encourager or not. We can choose, as we'll find out this morning, to be enthusiastic or not. Attitudes are a choice. Attitudes are not grounded in feelings. As people of God, our attitudes are grounded in who God is, what God says, and how God acts. But so many times we allow our attitudes to be grounded in feelings rather than in our relationship with God and in His character. This morning, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul has been writing and giving instruction to the Christians at Corinth. He says, thank God, He gives us the victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. So, my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. And then I pulled this little passage from the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 19, verse 2. It is not good to have zeal, which is, I'm just going to kind of suggest, is the closest Hebrew concept to enthusiasm. It's not good to have zeal, not good to have enthusiasm without knowledge. In other words, knowing what enthusiasm or zeal is about and from whence it comes. So again, it goes back to that thing of where do our attitudes, what is the basis for the attitudes that we have? And again, they're not feelings, but they're rooted in God, who He is, what He says, and how He acts. So the place I want to begin this morning is to have a working understanding of what is meant by enthusiasm. So we're going to define the word, define the concept, talk a little bit about what it's not, and then we're going to think about how that attitude of enthusiasm, what it can do for us, what it can mean for us in our daily lives. Enthusiasm, interesting, I think this is fascinating. The word enthusiasm actually comes from the combining of two old Greek words, and theos, T-H-E-O-S, in your worship guide this morning, which literally means in God. Literally it means in God, or to be filled with God. You know, it's really only in the past century that the term enthusiasm has drifted away from its spiritual rootage into talking about other things. But for centuries, the word enthusiasm was a religious term. It was meant to describe religious people in God, filled with God. So many times we think of enthusiasm a little differently than that, right? Enthusiasm sometimes can be circumstantial excitement. You know, if circumstances are good and, you know, you're kind of energized by what's going on around you, that's kind of the way sometimes we think about or the way we kind of conjure up enthusiasm. Circumstantial excitement. Only problem with that is, same with feelings, as soon as the circumstances change, the enthusiasm melts away. That's why attitudes can never be rooted in feelings and just fleeting circumstances. Because as soon as feelings and circumstances change, attitudes change. The other kind of enthusiasm sometimes that we experience is what I would call mandated optimism. Have you ever been in a workplace or some environment where the boss or the supervisor or the guys from corporate come in and, you know, they're talking about a new strategy, a new plan, a new product, and they look at all the rank and file employees and say, now we need to get excited about this. That's mandated optimism. Give you an example of mandated optimism from my own experience. Several years ago, my son Andrew played for Patrick Henry High School football team. And the years he played for Patrick Henry were just not good years for Patrick Henry Patriot football. And I remember the first game of one particular season, we had the first game in the new stadium on the campus of Patrick Henry. And so we had a big, you know, ribbon cutting and so on and so forth. It was a big game, and we're kicking off the new season and new stadium and so on and so forth. And they were playing Bassett High School that night. And so, you know, everybody was kind of fired up, and folks were there in the stands, moms and dads and students, and, you know, it was a good night, and all this kind of thing. And so, again, first game of the season against Bassett High School. And I heard during that game something I thought I knew I had never heard before in football, and something I don't think I will ever hear again in football. Because it was just a horrible game. It was just a horrible game. Bassett was just running over Patrick Henry. And so, at one point in the game, Patrick Henry had the ball. It was third down. The quarterback had got sacked. Some penalties had been called. On the second play, the center threw the ball over the head of the quarterback, and the quarterback ran back 20 yards to call it. You with me? So Woody Deans, on the PA announcer, said this statement, which was a first and will never be repeated again in football. It's Patrick Henry, 3rd and 63. Now, if you don't know anything about football, what that meant was Patrick Henry had 63 yards to go to get a first down. That was kind of a summary of the night. We're now in the fourth quarter, about halfway through the fourth quarter. Bassett is up 60-0. You with me? I am not exaggerating for the purposes of illustration. I'm telling you exactly what happened. 60-0. So I'm looking down, you know, and kind of looking around, and, you know, poor Andrew and so on and so forth. But they're the Patrick Henry cheerleaders. Josh cheering their little hearts out. And they were going, you know, push them back, way back, push them back. You know, Josh cheering it, and I'm like, no. We just, you know, Coach Gray needs to throw the white towel. Let's just go to the locker room and get this thing over with. But sometimes that's what we think enthusiasm is, just kind of mandated optimism. You know, just kind of some rah-rah going on from time to time. Enthusiasm is in theos, in God. It's an attitude not based on circumstances. It's an attitude not because it's mandated optimism, but because one is filled with God. And thus it becomes an attitude that you and I carry with us regardless of circumstance. You know, in the 5th century, there was a small community of Christians in the country of present-day Syria. Small group of Christians. And they committed themselves to prayer, to worship, to being a Christian community, to acts of service. Their level, their commitment level was so deep. Their practice of the faith was so radical that the surrounding culture called this little Christian community in Syria the enthusiasts. Isn't that something? Well, they're God people, is what that meant. The enthusiasts. You know what? You and I need to have that kind of attitude in our lives and in our practice and in how we live, that people would look at us and say, you know what? He or she is an enthusiast. Filled with God. Filled with God. That's what enthusiasm is. So it's important that we know that we're grounded in that. This morning I want to talk about, in using 2 quick case studies, what can then in theos do for us? What can it mean for you and me if we intentionally choose to have that attitude? First, enthusiasm can alter how we perceive our environment. In theos can alter how we perceive our environment. And you know, really, if we're not careful, the reverse often is operative in our lives. We allow our environment to determine our attitudes, rather than our attitude giving us perspective on our environment. And so the little case study I want to lift up for you this morning is David's familiar story, where he goes to face off, to square up against the Philistine giant Goliath. And you know the story. The Philistines were, on one ridge, and the Israel army was on the other ridge, and there was a valley in between, and the Israel army looked across and saw the Philistines, and they cowered. They were afraid. They didn't know what to do. Why? Because, you see, they were allowing their environment to dictate their attitude. David shows up, and he's allowing his attitude to dictate how he sees the situation. And so we have this remarkable little description, this passage in 1 Samuel 17, because what had happened was the Philistines had basically said to the Israel army, I tell you what, rather than all of us rushing down the hill and, squaring off down in the valley, you send your best man and we'll send our best man, and we'll just let the 2 of them fight it out, and whoever wins, that determines the outcome of the battle. You know the story. But nobody from the Israel army wanted to do that. David raises his hand. He'll do it because, right, he's allowing his attitude to interpret his environment, while the others were operating in the reverse. And so we have in 1 Samuel 17:48, as Goliath moved closer to attack him, here we go, David ran quickly toward the battle line. That's enthusiasm. That's in theos. As Goliath moved into place, David ran quickly to the battle line. That's what enthusiasm can do. It can change how you and I see our environment, rather than allowing our environment to determine our attitude. Give you a little example from my life. When I was in seminary, I had the privilege to pastor a little country church of probably about 40, 50 folks up on Benton Mountain. And anyway, that church was in the Blue Ridge Baptist Association. Now, the Blue Ridge Baptist Association were Baptist churches that were in Floyd County, Patrick County, and I believe Carroll County. So 3 kind of rural areas. And And anyway, when I became pastor of Mount Olivet Baptist Church, I was about 24, 25 years old, something like that. I dropped the median age of the pastors in the Blue Ridge Baptist Association from like 97. They were a good group of guys, but they were a little older. So the director of the Blue Ridge Baptist Association called me up one time and he said, Nelson, he said, now that you're the pastor up there at Mount Olivet Baptist Church, he said, I really need to ask you to do something for the association. I said, okay, what is it? I was kind of naive. And he said, I want you to chair the youth committee. And I said, well, what does that involve? He said, we need to have a youth event. We hadn't had a youth event for the entire association for all the churches in years. And you're a young guy, and I want you to put something together. Would you do that for us? I said, sure, be happy to. So he and I talked, and we thought, and I had a great friend at that time that was the youth minister at Rainbow Forest Baptist Church down in Blue Ridge, and man, he just had it going on. He had a great youth group, and he was a dynamic speaker and whatnot. So I just decided, hey, you know what we're going to do in the Blue Ridge Baptist Church? We're going to have a youth rally night. And of course, this was before Facebook and email and all of that. So the director of the Blue Ridge Baptist Association, he and I, man, we sent out all these mailings to all the churches saying, hey, you know, we're going to have youth rally night. It's a Sunday night. We're going to have it at Floyd Baptist Church because that was kind of geographically central to everybody. You all come, you know, put out all this information, who was going to be there. We're going to have music. It's going to be great, and so on and so forth. So the night came. I had about 6 kids from my church, so we all, you know, motored over to Floyd Baptist Church. Floyd Baptist Church had about 6 or 7 kids, and so there were a good 12 of us. For youth rally night. Let me repeat that. There were a good 12 of us for youth rally night. No other church showed up. No other church brought stuff. So there I am. A dozen kids sitting in a little church sanctuary, probably sat a couple hundred people. My buddy, he's come on his church band, he's brought more than that with him to do the program. So there were more people literally on the little stage at Floyd Baptist Church than there were sitting in the pews. So anyway, it got about time to start. We kind of delayed. I just kept hoping surely some other church is going, surely somebody else is going to come. But so we decided to go ahead and proceed. After that 15 minutes, so I get up, Nelson Harris, and first thing I say is, hey, I really appreciate all of you coming. There's nobody here more disappointed than I am in the turnout. Let's pray. Really, that's the way it was. I might have had another sentence in there, but it was not more than that. So we prayed. I then introduced my buddy from Rainbow Forest Baptist Church and said he's got a youth group and they're going to do our program. So anyway, my buddy, he gets up and he says, I'm excited to be here. I'm fired up, man. We're going to have a great time in the Lord tonight. We're going to sing some songs. I got 2 or 3 seniors in high school with me tonight. They're going to give you a powerful testimony about what Jesus Christ has done in their life. And man, this is going to be awesome. Well, it was like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, back to back. So there I stood. Well, nobody's more disappointed than me. Why? Because, see, I had allowed the environment to dictate my attitude. My buddy allowed his attitude to dictate the environment. And we had an amazing night. We had an amazing night. That's what entheos does for us. Secondly, enthusiasm causes us to exceed our abilities. Enthusiasm causes us to exceed our abilities. You know, God has given to us talent, skills, and abilities, and if you and I just operate to our abilities, we'll always do what's expected. Now, how many of you like to have a job performance review and the supervisor has checked the box, met expectations? I don't consider that to be an overwhelming endorsement, by the way. Met expectations. I heard somebody say one time that if you take enthusiasm and you marry it with ability, you get opportunity. You You get opportunity to exceed whatever you thought you were able to do. And you know, that's what entheos does for us. It allows us to exceed our abilities. Second case study. We have this from Paul's letter to the Christians at Corinth. He's talking about the churches in Macedonia. And man, this was a persecuted group. They didn't have anything, but they did have entheos. They did have enthusiasm. So while the word isn't mentioned here, it just kind of oozes with it, because listen to how Paul describes the Macedonian churches. He said, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able. So they did what was expected, but look at the next statement. And even beyond their ability. See, that's where entheos kicks in. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing, and even beyond their ability. When you and I choose to have the attitude